Hello, my name is Petula and this is All Things Agile. In this episode, I would like to talk about the importance of listening, truly listening to be a better coach. You will be looking for the facial expressions, the body language, the things that are not said. I usually mention to my peers that I call this listening for the person and not listening to the person. It's something that is really beyond. Now, I should mention two disclaimers. I mean coaching here by the discipline in which we, the coaches, help someone, a coachee, or a team to come up with the solutions or perspective for a problem or a situation they are facing. So the bulk of the work is really done by the coachee, and that's why listening is so important, and we should probably use a different way of listening in those conversations. So maybe you are not an agile coach, but you are a scrum master or you are people manager, you're managing people. Maybe you even are some sort of nondescript agility enabler. You're constantly in touch with people, helping them to tackle change in your organization. I am confident that you will be called into action to coach every now and again. And I do find that the main skill for coaching really is learning how to truly listen. And I call this a skill because that's how I see it. You can improve it, you can learn to be better at it. I know I have. So I will be sharing here my experience, how I went from not so great of a listener for coaching to how I progressed where I am today. It is not the end of the journey. I think it is a skill that you can only get better at. Really hard to master. And I will be also sharing not only the experience, but the things I did that I consider my strategies to get better at listening for coaching. So, what does it look like when we are not deeply listening for the person, the coachee? I can think of two things: speaking too much or interrupting. And they might sometimes happen together, and they come from many different reasons. They usually have to do with the coach themselves, something on their own self-awareness and self-regulation. So I'll start with some of my experiences here. For me, it was not so much speaking too much, although it did happen, right? And it was really sad in that case because I don't think I lack self-awareness. I could see very well what's going on. I just wasn't able to stop myself before it happened. So I had to watch my very own train wreck. And in this case, I feel that it was more a lack of self-regulation. So I could not really control myself. And I think some of the reasons why I would speak a lot could happen back then with the inability to deal with silence. It took me a while to understand that silence is a really important component of the coaching conversation, and it does speak volumes. Silence actually is conversation, especially when you get uncomfortable, and dealing with that discomfort is definitely something that made me prolong conversation sometimes to an unhelpful extent. The second thing was also interrupting someone, and in my case, I think that stemmed from anxiety. So it's not a great thing to interrupt anyone in any situation, much less in a coaching conversation. I think, my anxiety has also to do with the ability to control what's going on. The conversation can go in many places when you're coaching, and I felt the need that, I need to know what's going on, I need to know where it's going. It is a misconception. So I know I did not need to be in control, and I had to learn how to let go of that anxiety to really be there, stop interrupting my coachee, and let them, focus into whatever they had to say, including the pauses and the silence that they had to make and give. I think another reason for either speaking too much or interrupting had to do, especially early in my career, with showing that I know. Young woman coaching, I really did feel the pressure, and I somehow succumbed to that, and I had to distill my knowledge somehow in the conversation. And that's a little bit related to what I said before, that the conversation is not about myself, it's about the coachee, so I shouldn't feel pressured to show how much I know. But it came to the I guess I was not so very aware as well of my place as a coach, so it was a whole big learning in itself. I also find that this whole I need to prove that I know has two other misconceptions in it. The first one being, well, I don't need to prove that I know because people will form an opinion about me no matter what I do. I might be in the right, I might be having my best intentions. I can't control people's perception, so they will keep thinking whatever they want to think about me once the conversation is over, and even during the conversation. So that need to prove that I know whatever I think I know is really not important, should not be there. So the other thing about having to show that we know is that we actually don't know. It was a realization that took me a while to come, but it came eventually. And it is not, something like a false sense of being humble. It really is the truth. We are only having a fraction of whatever happened, right? So the coachee is telling something that they lived, and we have only their side of the story. On top of that, there are emotions and perceptions added there, and they might not even be telling us everything. So no, we really don't know. So we don't need to show that we know something that we truly, really don't, and we should just be okay with that. So I think it's time then to share what I consider my strategies to become a better listener for coaching. The first one is check yourself. I check myself every time that I feel like I need to say something. As a coach, we will be conversing. We are in a conversation. We will be making remarks. There will be room for questions, for comments, even paraphrasing and whatnot. But we don't need to be the ones speaking the most, that is for sure. So every time I have that impetus, that urge, that thing that tells me, oh, I have something to say here, I really do stop myself. It takes a fraction of a second. It really is so quick. But in our brain, it really is possible to gain that consciousness of, okay, why do I need to say this? It is really the question I ask myself. Do I really need to say this? What am I bringing into this conversation by saying this? Is this truly helpful? Remember, as I said before, we need to remember the conversation. The moment is not for us, it's for the coachee. So when you stop and you check yourself, you are once again honoring that contract of putting the coachee as the person who deserves that moment. That brings me then naturally to the second strategy that I use, which is putting the coachee first. As simple as it sounds, it sometimes is hard to gain consciousness of those, especially if you have a problem with self-awareness, or in my case, the self-regulation part. And it really comes to when you're going to ask questions, especially, are you doing that out of curiosity? Or is your question really going to help open up something for the coachee? Sometimes we get invested in the story and we want to know more about it, especially early in the coaching conversation. That's really a lot of moments for us to ask a lot of questions to set the context, to understand what's going on a little bit. It sets the tone for the conversation we are going to have. However, I find that as the conversation progresses, we need to be more pointed and very, very intentional about the questions that we are going to be asking, because they are not questions to help us with our curiosity about what's going on here. It really has to do, if this question is going to come out here in the air, this question really needs to create something new for my coachee. Then the third strategy still continues and is actually very much centered in the subject of questions. Ask opening questions. There are many questions that we can ask, once again, especially in the beginning of the conversation. Those very closed ones, the ones that require a yes or no answer, or that makes the coachee give you a date and the place. Those are called closed questions, and they might have their place actually in the beginning of the conversation. But as we progress, I really don't make much use of them. I find that keeps my coachee stuck. They basically are more like stating facts, and for the most part, I find that as we progress towards finding solution or opening avenues, they are really not all that helpful. Now, there is also the type of question that many people like, that I also am a big fan of, but I try not to use them very much. Those are leading questions, and they are very, very used in the realm of problem solving. And I don't like to confuse coaching with problem solving, because my coaching is one thing and my coachee solving the problem is something else. So I don't mingle these things. Leading questions, they might be constructed in this way. Hey, don't you think that, well, if as a coachee I don't think that, how do I even answer your question? It seems like you're trying to point me into the direction that I should think that. So all these things that, not in a bad way, but they somehow tend to manipulate a little bit the feelings and the perception of the coachee, I don't use those questions. I don't think they are helpful in any way. What I really like are the opening questions. They might seem mysterious, and out of context, they might seem, very honestly, they seem silly, useless, something that you took from a book and you just keep shouting. But they are powerful. And if you're truly listening to what your coachee is saying, you will know how to formulate one that really makes sense. So if I just said something like, what do you think you can start doing? That's pretty open, pretty generic. But if we are in a moment of the conversation where the coachee had laid out many things already, and it's time to start figuring out next steps as opposed to keep exploring the problem, it's time to move to a solution. That is the sort of question that, helps the coachee to see some direction by themselves, to the extent, to the level that they want to see, because whatever they can think they can start doing tomorrow is really, really something for them to answer. And not for me. I'm not there to give a suggestion. I'm actually poking and seeing, hey, what do you, it all lies on you. What do you think you can start doing? And I'll tell you, this is an example out there, but once you are in the conversation, they become a little bit more crisp, because you will be making them very tuned to the context that you have at hand if you are listening. So they will not seem at all that out of place. They will really, really make sense. I guess I should then give like a half strategy that goes with the questions. I used to do this all the time, and this is not helpful at all. It is the use of wrappers. What are wrappers? You ask a question, and then you have to add something right after. I really, really am guilty of that one. I have done that for many years, and I would ask my question that would actually be a good question for the moment. What do you think you can start doing tomorrow? Because, and here goes all my explanation of why I am asking that question, or any other comment of something that I'm seeing. And my wrapper is not being helpful for two reasons. The first, it takes my coachee, at this moment, I ask the question, probably because we're building up to that moment in which the coachee is ready to start thinking about solutions. And I just took my coachee from that space of deep thinking. I just put them back into a mode of, now they have to listen to me. That is a pretty surface level of conversation. The coachee was really deeply thinking, solutioning, and now they are taken aback. So it's really unhelpful. I'm really sorry for all my coachees when I did that. The second reason why it's also not that helpful, I think I already explained that one before, is that you're not putting your coachee first. I mean, why are you trying to explain yourself, right? If the question was well intended, just let it sit. Don't be afraid of the silence. If the question is really weird, doesn't make sense, your coachee will reply back, will ask back actually. What do you mean by that? If it lands and it creates discomfort, let the discomfort be. Don't fill up the silence. And if you are afraid of what they might think of you and you need to show all your knowledge, so all the things I mentioned in the beginning, those are things that should be out of the way. This is the moment for the coachee. So that's why I think rappers are a no-no. Ask your questions, let it land, let it sit. Let's see what it creates, and only then re-engage. Give that moment back to the coachee. I have a final story. In this one, actually, it is a very happy one. It's a moment when I realized that my listening skills were really getting sharper. I was in a coaching circle. A lot of the coaches there are way more experienced than I am, so it's a fantastic place to learn. And in this particular situation, I was to coach a peer, and he was bringing a situation in which he was to coach a very new team, and he had never worked with that team before, and the team had a reputation. They were difficult, they were not paying attention to quality, etc. And there you go, send the coach to fix the team. And he was really nervous about the situation. He was thinking, what is the methodology I should use? How should I approach this team? I guess many of us coaches and scrum masters in situations like that, we know that we are all being watched, right? Are you going to be the one who finally fixes this team? So it has a lot of pressure for everybody, and it was no different for him. And then as we started the conversation, I laid out the very simple questions. Like I mentioned before, have you worked with this team? Why do you think they are difficult? And he was very thorough in his account of why the team was considered difficult and what are the problems he was foreseeing. And I gave him all the room to give his account. And at some point, when he seemed to have exhausted the context part of the conversation, he said everything he thought he knew, and was ready to maybe even ask back something. My one question was, well, how do you usually start working with a new team? Right there, no rappers. I don't even think it was necessarily very well phrased, but it was along those lines of, hey, when you start with a team, what is it that you do? And it took him a moment of silence. And it's funny because at that moment, I don't know if he was searching in his catalog, what are all the things I do when I start with a new team? Or if he was just surprised that he had not considered the possibility that he could just treat this so-called difficult team like any other team and just be a coach for them. And then he discovered that, well, I usually start by having conversations about value. And he's mostly coaching a scrum team, and therefore we're talking about value first. So there he goes. And yeah, I usually approach a team with my conversations about value. I have a set of exercises and things that I put in place, and then we all start to know each other. And right there, as he was describing that, he was also starting to smile a little bit to the corner of his mouth, and because he realized that, well, actually, this is just another team. I don't really need to arrive with a preconception, and it's actually not going to be that helpful. I should arrive open, fresh. They are my new team, and that was the only question really I asked. We then proceed to conclude our conversation with, where he would commit to the next steps that he wanted to do. But that was the very single question that I needed to ask for this coachee. And it goes to show that the power of opening questions, if you're really, really listening, so you have to really sharpen those skills in the toolbox of coaching. If you listen properly, if you listen fully, there will be this one thing or two things. There might be more questions depending on the conversation for sure, but it really is about, there is a moment as a coach that you really realize you can intervene here and be really, really helpful. So that was my successful story that I would like to share. And yeah, I keep telling that one because there was a one question type of coaching. So I'm really happy about that one for sure. If you found this coaching story interesting, if you have tried those strategies before, if you're going to try them, if you know something different and you would like to let me know, comment down below. I'd love to know. I really am passionate about this subject, and I really do hope this was useful. Now, I'll be coming up with more coaching stories, and if you think you are interested in knowing about them, click the subscribe button so you are aware of when they come up. And if you like this video, just give it a thumbs up, and I will see you next time. Bye.